Hey guys, good morning. Steve here. I am here to talk about our Gamma release and what we're up to in the next coming months here. Uh, Sort of a walkthrough of the Gamma release. We spent a lot of time solidifying our sidechain implementation. This is cool because it basically allowed us to go from something using Ethereum mainnet to using Ethereum mainnet for transaction and Nectar settlement for large balances of Nectar. But in the meantime, you can actually take those Nectar balances to a sidechain, basically do high-speed work there, and move that balance as a ambassador or a microengine developer to the back to the main chain when you're done. So we've got a proof of authority sidechain. We're running the sealers right now, and that's doing a block a second with arbitrary block size. So if you don't know your number of seconds in a day, I believe it's 86,400. So 86,000 blocks a day, arbitrary block size. I think we'll be able to scale to the demands on PolySwarm in the near and medium term pretty well. So we're pretty excited about that. Other issues with, with Gamma, we sort of completed end-to-end testing and put a few things in the development backend that allow us to iterate more rapidly, which is great in our march to stable, because we'll be able to add new features, stabilize existing ones, tweak things like arbiter selection and other contract-based stuff, and know that it all works together. So we're pretty excited about that. Documentation was another big add of ours. So we spent a lot of time basically making it easy as possible for ambassadors and microengine developers to actually pick up and use this thing. And right now, post-release of Gamma, we are working with those microengine developers and other existing AV companies on getting them into the test network. And the idea behind that is they're helping us dog food the product and really make sure that that what we developed, in our environment and what we tested in our environment really holds up in the real world and scales on top of that. So let me sort of move with that to questions and figuring out, sort of some of the stuff you guys have been asking. I know Blake and the rest of the team have done a reasonable job sort of culling these from Telegram. But, if you have any other questions, please throw them in the chat. We're happy to try and answer them. So the first one is, how interactive will Gamma be? How long before we can start making test submissions? So as a microengine developer and as an ambassador, Gamma is invite only for the moment. And that's to make sure we can really focus on, integrating early feedback from users into the development pipeline and not spend the time, sort of sorting through requests from people who aren't the sort of first engines and microengines on the network itself. So as part of that, we actually are discussing internally some ways to get samples from the public into that interface, and stay tuned for announcements there. But in the end, it should be as usable, and this is before stable, by the way, of people being able to upload files via web front end or via command line utility if they're so inclined, in order to sort of test out what we're doing on PolySwarm. Invite only stuff will continue to be the case for microengine developers, for ambassadors and arbiters for now. But if you're interested, get in touch, and we'll be happy to sort of consider the use case. Let's see, what else do we got? When will 1.0 come out? Will the roadmap be updated? We're planning on 1.0 sometime in December, and we'll solidify that date going forward. The roadmap will be updated once we have more data from testnet. So to give you an idea of what we're doing with testnet and the Gamma release, that's basically our path to stable. And we're basically prioritizing tuning and feature requests from our early adopters there and wrapping that into stable. So basically Gamma will become stable, and all the sort of the feature requests and the fixed bugs in Gamma will sort of be rolled into stable. So that's why we don't have an exact roadmap update for what constitutes the stable yet. So stay tuned there. We expect to have that solidified sometime in the next month, to be short with that. When can we expect the first AV company announcement? So we're working with a dozen people right now, or a dozen people and companies right now. I should mention that a lot of these companies have what would constitute actually full antivirus engines. And I will further say that some of them can be found on VirusTotal today. What we're doing right now is we're wrapping their engines into testnet, and we're making sure they run on the infrastructure we have laid out for testnet, and also that they can scale. So there's some combination of we're actually running some of the engines that these initial participants have been gracious enough to sort of put in to the effort. We're running those on our infrastructure. And there's also some participants who actually prefer to run their own microengines and sort of and engines in true decentralized fashion. So we're testing that all out and smoothing out all the bumps. And we expect to do that over the next month, and then make announcements about who's actually operating on the network. And frankly, a lot of that is just so, as a project, we announce stuff that's actually active and working, and not just sort of flimsy partnerships where we've kind of agreed to do something. And, we have actual code and product and engine integrations backing this before we announce it. Let's see, I think we covered that. Let's see. Will these companies be developing more than one microengine each? So this is a nuanced answer. Some of these companies have a full engine that they will be plugging into PolySwarm. Some have multiple products that constitute more of on the lines of what we think a microengine is. To sort of give you an idea of the difference, a microengine is something that focuses very specifically on one threat vertical. So, for example, we have one grant program recipient that will be doing document scanning, focused on PDF, doc files, and other Microsoft Office formats. We're very excited to get his stuff online because we think it's very good. And so that's a good example of sort of 1 to 2 microengines right there. So those are separate products for him. What we've discussed with him is that he's actually wrapping those into sort of one submission interface, but we're actually working closely with the microengine authors and seeing if they want to do those, each microengine under its own separate account. So you can sort of track the performance of something that works on just PDFs versus something that works on doc files, or if they want to wrap it into sort of one front end where it all works on one account. That's ongoing, and we don't have a great answer yet, but the short answer is some people will be wrapping more than one microengine, and some companies will be wrapping their full engine solution, so it's closer to a full antivirus product. So the great thing about that approach with microengines and engines in the mix is we should get a lot more diversity in what PolySwarm provides right off the bat, which we're excited about. Let's see. Are there developments in terms of arbiter selection and/or ambassador recruitment? On the arbiter selection front, yes, within that dozen of initial engines that we're working on, a lot of those guys are actually interested in being arbiters as well as engines on the network. So we're in talks with them to figure out what that means to them and their staking requirements, and how everybody in the equation profits in the long term, because that's what the network is about, taking that economic incentive that we would usually just give to one vendor that doesn't really sort of protect us in a 360-degree fashion, and moving that to a distributed model. So we're not going to have any announcements on the AMA today with respect to new arbiters, but we're moving towards that by the release of stable. Let's see. Do arbiters still need 10 million plus nectar, or has this number changed? Yeah, 10 million plus nectar is the current plan. We are hand selecting some of the arbiters. So if we think there's somebody out there who really adds some value, but they're an open source project or somebody that doesn't have access to a lot of funding, we will happily fund them. A good example here is the Bremer team that are behind sort of becoming the open source based on Cuckoo Sandbox Arbiter, right? We think their development history on Cuckoo Sandbox shows that they really have the community in mind. So in terms of arbitership, they're sort of our first arbiter of choice there, and obviously they will be staked to that level to make sure that they can operate on the network. See, let me scroll here. What has you the most excited about Gamma? Real data, getting this test network rolling, making sure that what we've outlined in the white paper is actually useful to the participants on the network, and being able to tweak and add features that better support the existing users on the network. We've been pretty excited with the initial response we've gotten from engine and microengine developers, especially some of the ones that are sort of on networks like VirusTotal, that really are interested in our model for how it's going to help the situation and how it's going to help evolve the antivirus landscape past it where it is today. So I'm excited to sort of make all that work, but it is hard work making sure that sort of every participant in the network is there, which is where the market design aspects of what we're doing come in. What was the biggest change from beta? I'd say again acceleration on the sidechain work, and really this focus on putting this into a heavy production infrastructure, and scaling the model. We had a lot of corner cases that we didn't consider before. For example, if you take a look at PolySwarm D, you'll notice it doesn't keep a lot of state, and that's by design, so we can schedule and scale how things are handled within PolySwarm D without running into sort of vertical scaling bottlenecks, so we can scale horizontally essentially. Okay, what do we got? About 80, let's see, now that 1.0 is next, sorry, I skipped questions. Now that 1.0 is next, how will we keep up with development updates? Yeah, so we've been getting some great pull requests and bug fixes to our public GitHub. What you may not have noticed is we're not developing directly on the public GitHub. There's a few reasons for that. One of them is our continuous integration suite and our end-to-end testing framework is a little bit more involved than what GitHub-centric tools allow. But very soon we will be doing our primary development of, I believe, microengine and PolySwarm D on GitHub at least. So you'll be able to sort of track our pushes and branches and issues on those public-facing things in near real time. We're pretty excited about that. So that should help everybody track our progress to 1.0. And I'd like to point out that thanks to a pretty, our great development team, we've been able to release everything we wanted on time so far. And we're pretty excited about that. So next question, about 80 million Nectar moved from the company wallet. Can you tell us what it is for? Sure, a variety of things. I will say we're not always going to get into detail about which ambassadors we're engaging or which microengine developers we're engaging before we're ready. So some of that 80 million Nectar went to the Wings AI prediction rewards. If you saw, Wings AI did some predictions about how we would do during our token sale, and some of those rewards went out the door recently. We also sent some out to our announced and yet to be announced advisors, so they can help us evangelize use on the network, since we are moving towards production with our Gamma release and sort of onboarding people quicker. And then some of it will also be used to support initial arbiters and ambassadors. So that's sort of where our initial Nectar transfers were targeted at. Let's see. So now I'll get into the questions from the chat. Thanks for being patient while I got through our backlog there. Rohit says, hi, Steve. When ambassadors need to buy Nectar from PolySwarm, at what price will they get it? The ongoing market price or something else? Rohit, our initial plan is the ongoing market price. I think there will be a percentage delta there, a slight percentage delta in terms of transaction costs and sort of insulating from market risk, but that's our initial plan. We think that we will also be able to do software that sort of does this in real time, so we can match market needs. But we're working on basically making sure that arbiters and ambassadors have a sort of a direct way to get it. Siddhartha, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. You can help me pronounce it, and if you ever meet me in public. Will PolySwarm use AI to detect bugs, detect the bugs and optimize the malware library? So I'm not sure that I quite understand your question. So let me say where I think AI will be useful generally within PolySwarm, and it'll give you some idea of the model we're seeking. So we think AI will be very useful in helping people price their assertions against bounties in the production network. So what that means is if somebody sort of determines something is malicious, but they're unsure how many tokens to stake on that assertion, we think there's a good fit for AI there, helping them understand how to price that stake. We've also seen in some of the grants that we've initially funded, and not to give too much away about the cool technology, which from our perspective looked really cool, and the reason we funded these, but they're using and applying AI in various different ways to classify and discover new threats, even ones they've never seen before. And so we think that will be a very powerful paradigm in microengine land. So our microengine developers are actually using AI to look for threats and assert against them already. And in terms of optimize the malware library, I'm not quite sure what you mean there. Happy to hear some follow up. And it's Sid for short. Glad to hear I pronounced your name somewhat correctly. Okay, so yeah, back to that last part, optimizing the malware library. If you have a follow up there, I'm not quite sure what you mean, but I'd be happy to answer it. So moving on, Tor here, TORR. Is there enough documentation available for people who want to get involved in building their own microengine? And is that invite only? Nope, docs are public, docs.polyswarm.io, I believe. You can also take a look at our GitHub, and the various projects are documented. If you want to get in touch, we can look at getting you in on the initial invite. Now, for the record, some of the invite-only stuff is again to sort of narrow our audience so we can get initial feedback from people we know are interested in developing microengines, and make sure that we get the big bugs and whatever gamma worked out before we sort of introduce a larger audience. And you see this is sort of the approach that Google and others take, is sort of this private beta, private release. So if you remember when Gmail first came out, it was actually a private beta for a while. Let's see, 24 fields per second. Still great name. Can an ambassador ask for a specific engine to be built for a specific problem they had? And how can they ask the community to develop a microengine to cover the needs? So there is no bounty system for getting engines built to specification. We've thought about this and kicked it around internally. It's not a problem, but the big challenge we have to solve is, when an ambassador asks for an engine, who sort of determines if that engine submitted by a developer meets the specification, and who sort of says, yes, it's this bounty is won by this developer, and we should pay that out. That's something we'd like to tackle probably after 1.0, but it's sort of a longer process to get that right. But I agree with you. It's a great idea. And if you've got any follow-up ideas on how we can make that practical and pragmatic, we'd be happy to hear them. Thanks for the question, 24 fields per second. Nick, will there be a mainnet in the future considering ETH getting clogged up occasionally, and the unsurety, I guess, of scaling ETH? Will it be possible to switch if required to other chains like Neo, EOS, etc.? Let me take those in reverse order. So the sidechain setup we have today is using Geth or Go Ethereum and proof of authority mode for that sidechain scaling. We see a world where there are actually a couple of PolySwarm sidechains based on both the use and the sensitivity of the data, and some of them will be invite-only sidechains, that sort of thing. But the idea is that the Nectar balance always synchronizes back to the Ethereum mainnet, which we don't see for that use case. There being a problem with the Ethereum net, or the Ethereum mainnet. So yes, we will be able to switch between different sidechains. I will say that internally, we are evaluating several different options for the sidechain implementation. I don't think we'll have any other sidechain implementations that aren't Ethereum based before 1.0, but it's definitely something we're actively testing, and we plan on doing the same invite-only sidechain testing for any sort of early release stuff that we're proof of concepting out. Let's see. So I don't know. I think that answers all of your question. So to sort of really solidify and round out, in case I wasn't clear, at least up through 1.0, mainnet will be Ethereum. Sidechains will be Ethereum based, but in different modes. And we're sort of targeting that block per second model that we discussed earlier. And we're looking at other sidechain implementations that we think complement that model and testing those out, maybe in the run up to stable, but really heavily testing those post 1.0. Tor, again, you mentioned some companies are running tests. Are those ongoing partnerships or perhaps already established ones? It would be encouraging to know a bit more about where you're at on this subject. So Tor, it's 50-50. Some of those aren't established partnerships, but we are collaborating, and we've got copies of their engine and we're testing it in our test net, or some people are actively testing from their own infrastructure. So really why we're sort of doing these announcements slowly is we're really solidifying, what it means on this partnership, how Nectar works, Nectar interchange between the companies works, and getting early feedback from these guys about how they actually want to participate in this network. Because one of the things we realized as we've talked to, I don't know, probably 20 or so companies in the last couple weeks, and before that, at least 50 or 60, is this idea that they all sort of have different models for how they want to use PolySwarm. Some want to use PolySwarm as sort of a way to see samples and help improve their product while still contributing back to the PolySwarm network. Some people actually want to become arbiters on the PolySwarm network, so they sort of get to participate more effectively in the network than they do with something like VirusTotal. And some are interested in taking existing engines that they've already built and reaching new customers that they weren't able to reach before with their limited distribution. So all these different stakeholders, they have very different goals from what they want to see with PolySwarm. And so as we've sort of gotten to this initial dozen that we're going to put on PolySwarm, they all have different sort of requests for what partnership means to them, right? And so working out those details has been taking time. And that's why we're sort of not ready to announce, just a general partnership before we have some more details hashed out. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we plan on all those being ongoing partnerships. We also have some technology partnerships that they're not necessarily security developers or engine providers, but they're very interested in the missions PolySwarm's trying to achieve, right? This idea of decentralizing antivirus, this idea of pushing more compute towards the edge. These are all very interesting things to some of those other potential partnerships that aren't direct engine providers. Let's see. Let's move on. Abras Rocks, if I'm pronouncing that right, probably not, asks, will there be monthly or consistent updates between now and 1.0? So yeah, in terms of consistent updates, we'll be pretty heavy pushing to GitHub. We'll also start detailing some of our technology decisions in blog posts on the march to 1.0, and sort of talking more there. So yeah, I think there'll be consistent updates there. We expect those to take the form of blog posts and GitHub issues settled and things like that, and updates to the documentation. Will there be some focus on liquidity as well, considering HitBTC has been having issues? Also, will there be an updated roadmap coming up? So I answered questions about the roadmap earlier from Nick. Sorry if you're just joining us. We plan to sort of update the roadmap once we've had some initial feedback from testnet in the next month on liquidity and different exchanges. As is history, I don't necessarily comment on what's going on there, but we're well aware of HitBTC's sort of downtime and upgrades to the trading engine. And obviously, we want that scenario in terms of ambassadors and arbiters being able to onboard and operate on the PolySwarm network consistently to be as strong as possible. So as always, we are actively working on that. Other than that, I'm not going to comment on specifics. In reference to Q13, 3? Question 13. By optimize, I mean, does the software improve itself? Yeah, so a couple things. With most AI, there's this idea of training, right? And does the model consistently learn? And in some of the microengine grants we've funded, yes, their model consistently learns and improves itself, because it must in PolySwarm. Otherwise, in the long run, it'll probably lose money. Rohit, the number of Ethereum collected during the ICO is still there in the wallet untouched. So how are your current finances being taken care of? That's a good question, Rohit. So remember, in the public sale, that went to a single Ethereum wallet, and the short answer is we did some things with pre-sale funds. And we are in a decent cash position with those pre-sale funds where we don't have to touch any of our existing Ethereum right now. Let's see. What else? I think that's all the questions I have today. Happy to answer any other follow-ups in the next AMA or online. Could you please let us know if you decided the deadline for PolySwarm 1.0? Yeah, hi Rohit. I answered that, I believe, at the beginning of the AMA. We're targeting December, and we think it's going to be, early to mid-December is kind of our target right now. That's where we're at with that. We will have updates running up to 1.0, and hopefully that sort of satisfies the demand to let you guys know we're working on it. Anyway, thanks for joining us today. Happy to answer any other questions or chat more fully. I know there's a lot of information packed in there. Let us know if we can clarify anything. Thanks, guys.